any man have an ear, let him hear. Stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up, rise up, rise up, rise up. The dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds, and tongues, and nations.
Zechariah Sitchin was a sincere man who rightly rejected the ludicrous theory of human origins proffered by Darwinists, but imprudently also rejected the true narrative of Scripture in favor of the Sumerian account written from the perspective of fallen rebels. Sitchin wasn't just developing a new theory for the origin of man, he was rekindling a very ancient deception, a deception associated with extremely guileful entities that are still active in the world today and anxious for the opportunity to manifest themselves again and guide mankind toward another Tower of Babel scenario.
I would like to tell you more about Zechariah Sitchin. Something that he never wrote in any book, something happening to him personally. He was about 3 years before he was dead. He told me, John Mario, one night I wake up at 12 o'clock, and I saw an Anunnaki sitting on my bed. And this alien looked at me and said, Zechariah, go immediately to the hospital because your heart is going to leave you. And he asked me, what would you do? And I said, go to the hospital immediately. He went to the hospital. The same night, he was operated at the heart. And they told him that he would never survive that night if he was not going to be in the hospital at night. He never wrote this in any book, but he told me, and I can tell you now.
In the alien world, which is another level, extra-dimensional, not like perceived by the common ufologist, but by the esoteric person who has knowledge, they have orders. Orders meaning that they belong, these aliens, some of them belong to orders, specific orders that they follow, a specific entity. They are devoted to him. So it's not a question only of humans following some god, but it's also these entities following their own, chief in command. So our perception is always wrong because we tend to simplify things, to make it too materialistic. Many ufologists, for example, they lose the bigger picture because either they take one truth, which is very pragmatic, meaning, okay, there is the alien, he abducted, brought me on the spaceship, blah, blah, blah. Then instead, you should have a different kind of perception. You should say, but is that really what happened? Why in the Middle East nobody's ever been abducted? But they actually tell you about being abducted by jinn in their own world for thousands of years. So it's speaking just a different language in different times, but this reality exists. Mm-hmm. So in the Vatican, these things are known. And what the Jesuits have done, and he knows very well in the last 2 decades, is been to open up to this reality, and with this organization called CIFAS, they've organized 2 big conferences in the Vatican about the subject of the UFOs. But here we're not talking about conferences with the average ufologist, new agey, dressed up in white, being there in Arizona watching the skies. Here we're talking about military people. We're talking about military, about politicians, about cardinals. The Vatican is involved in ufology in ways that they can't even imagine. That they have secrets under the Vatican that are buried that could really change the course of history.
Let me just say one more thing. The Vatican invested an awful amount of money in telescopes. You know that? You know why? They're looking for Nibiru. They want to know one day before anybody else when Nibiru's coming to say, the planet of the saviors is coming, and they want to put their flag on it.
In the early 1990s, a bitter conflict was brewing for the control of a mountain in the Sonoran Desert of Arizona. The mountain was Mount Graham, and the conflicting parties were the San Carlos Apache Indians and an international consortium of astronomers led by the Vatican. Mount Graham has always been sacred to the Apache. It's mentioned in many of their songs and oral traditions and is believed to be the abode of powerful spiritual beings. In 1984, the Vatican, together with the University of Arizona, chose Mount Graham as a site on which to build several state-of-the-art telescopes, including the Large Binocular Telescope, the largest and most advanced telescope in the world, which would be fitted with a specialized device strategically named Lucifer. The Lucifer device enables observations to be made in the near-infrared wavelength range and can penetrate through dust clouds deep into the far reaches of outer space.
The Vatican was very aggressive in its move to secure Mount Graham for their observatory. Representatives of the Apache tribe pleaded with the consortium to choose another mountain, but their protests fell on deaf ears. Legislation for the approval of the project was pushed through governmental channels, and the Apache were pushed aside.
During an interview in 1997, radio host Art Bell asked the former Jesuit priest Malachi Martin about why the Vatican had muscled its way onto Mount Graham and what it was they were looking for in deep space. Malachi Martin's response ignited a fire firestorm of speculation.
All right. Father, the Vatican has a very, very great deal of power.
That's right.
We've talked about it. They have, whether they admit it or not, a great deal of political power all around the world. One of the things that they did fairly recently was they muscled, and I do intend to use that word, they muscled their way onto a mountain in Arizona, Mount Graham, and they built an observatory on Mount Graham in connection with an Arizona university. However, the Vatican has the larger part of the control of this observatory, looking at deep space things.
That's right.
Now, why would they have done that, Father?
Because the attitude, the mentality amongst those who at the higher levels, the highest levels of Vatican administration and Vatican geopolitics know that now knowledge of what's going on in space and what's approaching us could be of great import in the next 5 years, 10 years.
Carefully and well-chosen words, Father. Thank you.
This guy was no Johnny-come-lately. Malachi Martin worked under 3 popes, was favored by them. He was a formidable polyglot. He could speak 17 languages, and he could translate most extinct languages. He was the first guy that broke the news about how hundreds of young boys were being molested by what he called Luciferians, satanic priests, that he said reached all the way to the highest levels of the Vatican, among the College of Cardinals. And at the time, you know, Jesuits and others were saying he's a chronic liar, he's making all this stuff up. Well, history proves that he was actually telling the truth. What was he right about with regards to Mount Graham? In 2009, the Vatican abruptly called an astrobiology study week. But what was the subject matter? If you go back and Google this and read, they really only had one objective. They brought in 30 of the world's top astronomers. They brought in theologians to ask one question: what will the impact on faith, on religion be, given the disclosure or the discovery of advanced extraterrestrial intelligence? 90 days later, the Royal Academy. Now, this is the oldest scientific body in the world. They convene, call all of the scientists from around the world, including astronomers from the Vatican. And what do they want to talk about? Exactly the same thing: the detection of extraterrestrial intelligence and the impact on society. Well, we were wanting to get to the bottom of all of that. Why are they saying the things that they're saying? And so Chris Putnam and I decided that the only way that we could know for sure was we had to go to the Jesuits ourselves. We had to go to their astronomers, and specifically, if any way possible, we had to go to the top of Mount Graham.
And this is the headquarters of the Jesuit order.
This is the entrance of the Jesuit quarters for the world. The world. Here the general lives. The black
so here, this is where the general resides. Is here in this building. This building.
It's like very important building. I mean, not very known touristically. Not very known touristically. Absolutely not known touristically. But inside here, the most important interreligious affairs are conducted at a worldwide level.
So while we're standing here in the headquarters of the Jesuits, tell us about Mount Graham.
Mount Graham was a holy site for the Indians, for the American Indians. So the link there is both at scientific level, at esoteric, magical. I mean, it's a gate. It's an interdimensional.
There's a gate on Mount Graham.
This is what is said, but at the same time,
and you think they have interest in controlling that gate or activating that gate?
At the same time, they have also interest in watching the stars above. Like I told you earlier on in the other part of the interview we did together, they have the knowledge that everything that is below is reflected above, and so they want to exactly see when these prophecies manifest how there is certain, let's say, certain conjunctions in the stars that need to be monitored and interpreted not like a scientist will, a classic scientist, but a scientist with holy knowledge. Holy knowledge, no? And they give a lot of importance to ancient cultures and their holy sites, because they know that those holy sites are built on ways for, understand? So there is, let's say, a mix of traditional science and esoteric science in this choice. And we can also say that what they're doing there is very important for them, because those watchers who had contact with those American Indians left a trail of their existence there and left some knowledge, and of course also now they can feed on it by being there. If you see, when the American Indians were decimated, the Jesuits were always there. They went into hearing the history of these various groups, finding out the different historical aspects, finding out if what kind of context they had with the world. So then they said, okay, this tribe has a privileged contact. Where is their base? Where is their most holy ground? Okay, tack.
We get to the top of the mountain. We went first to the Vatican's Advanced Technology Telescope. We met with the Jesuit who was on duty. We asked him about Malachi Martin. We asked him about Corrado Balducci. We asked him why Jose Funes was out there saying we would baptize aliens. We have all of this on film. And some of his answers were astonishing, but the one that I found to be the most intriguing was when he told us that the Vatican now only uses the Advanced Telescope for one purpose. One. He said, and that is to monitor exo-worlds on which they believe the conditions exist for extraterrestrial life. Now, that might have been a real tell about what it is they're watching on the top of that mountain that they think might be approaching the Earth, as Malachi Martin said. So we spend the morning there. But we also had a second agenda while we were there, because the Vatican's Advanced Technology Telescope is only one of 3 telescopes. They also use the apparatus that is inside what's called the Large Binocular Telescope, which is the largest telescope in the world, and it's on the top of Mount Graham. So we left the VAT. We walked up to the top of the mountain where exists the Large Binocular Telescope, and that place was buzzing. And there were people everywhere in the building. There were a whole team of German astronomers who were there making adjustments to the telescope. There's a point where I think we're up 7 stories or something, and now we're looking down onto the top of the giant twin mirrors, and you see me and Chris standing there, and the engineer standing there with a laser pointer, and he points down to the middle of the twin mirrors where there's a large red device down in there, and you hear him saying, this is the Lucifer device. And that's exactly what they call it. In fact, they lovingly call it Lucy. And they are constantly monitoring things with the Lucifer device. Now, they would not allow us to see what the Lucifer device was watching, but we were told that it was very specifically monitoring something in deep space. They were very cryptic about it. Again, seemed to be echoing what Malachi Martin had said, that they were watching a specific something that is approaching the Earth. We were also astonished that day when we went inside the control room, and here's all these banks of monitors with images of deep space, and as the engineer is talking about the Lucifer device and deep space and all that, he just blurts out something that we didn't even ask. And he starts talking about how sometimes they have to wait for all of the UFOs to get out of the way so that they could look at other things in space. And we were astonished by that, because we had intended not to even ask that question, but without asking. What the engineer is telling us is that it was so crowded with essentially an armada of UFOs that they had to literally sit there for hours waiting for these UFOs to move out of the way in very deep space so that this guy could focus on this one part of this exo world. And we have a lot of this on film. He's just telling us this stuff. So we were really astonished how it's almost like another UFO. And they're not talking about space debris and asteroids. They're talking about what appear to be intelligently operated craft of some type that evidently fill deep space. When we came down off the mountain, I was immediately contacted by a member of the Apache Nation. He emailed me, and he wanted me to know that the reason that the Apache did not want the Vatican and NASA and ASU on the top of Mount Graham was because Mount Graham is, for them, one of the 4 holiest mountains in all of the world. And it is for all indigenous Americans. And it is because, he said, in your language, he said, you would call this a stargate, a portal, a doorway, a strategic geographic location where, he said, entities have entered into and exited from our 3-dimensional reality since the dawn of time. Well, I got to tell you, when he said that, the conspiracy meter in my head went off the Richter scale, right? When I started thinking now about why that mountain and the Vatican. Because the Vatican has shown around the world, wherever these esoteric places are discovered, wherever metaphysical phenomenon seems to be predominant, wherever these ancient and even megalithic structures are found, they will move in, take over the land if at all possible, build facilities and churches and whatever in those very locations so that they can maintain a constant presence where these doorways, these portals have been found.
Believe it or not, stargates, portals, interdimensional doorways that open into supernatural realms are real. The discovery and control of the specific locations on Earth where these gates exist is one of the most classified deep black operations conducted by military and intelligence organizations around the world. The sorcery associated with accessing and opening these gates was the most dangerous and destructive knowledge given to mankind by fallen angels. Legends of gateways and portals opening to both heavenly and hellish realms frequently appear in the tablets, scrolls, and scripts of the ancient world, including both the Old and New Testaments of the Bible.
We wanted to examine whether or not it is a biblical premise that there are specific locations on the earth where there are gateways or doorways, vortexes that connect supernaturalism with the physical world. And once we started looking at whether or not that is biblical, it was amazing how it just kind of opened up in the scripture. And now we started seeing everywhere, right? Genesis 28, Jacob has a vision and he sees, now in the King James Version of the Bible, it's called a ladder, but the Hebrew there is very interesting in that it seems to describe a spiral. So was it like a spiral staircase? That's what some people have suggested, but others have said a vortex, which happens to be kind of an international symbol that you find across all cultural barriers as a symbol of a vortex, right? But in any case, Jacob sees angels ascending and descending from heaven. He comes out of that vision. He is so shook up because this is so vivid that he gets out anointing oil. He's trembling, right? And he anoints the entire place, but he says something very important. Now, a lot of people say that he said, this is the house of God. But if you read that in the Hebrew, that's not what he says. He says there is a gate here to the house of God. There is a gateway, a doorway here. Well, we found that once you started thinking about that concept, it spanned from the Old Testament through the New Testament. Jesus arrives. He's talking about the windows of heaven and how from henceforth you'll see the windows of heaven open and angels ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. It's an Old and New Testament principle. Now, we also found that, like the Apache Indian have done, the scripture often combines the location of these gateways to mountainous regions. Remember how Moses, whenever he's going to meet with God, He has to go to the top of the Mount Sinai. Look at how when Jesus returns, it says his feet will touch the top of the Mount of Olives, and then he will descend down to the earth. In the apocryphal book of Enoch, it talks about the 200 watchers that descended in the days of Jared. But how do they come down? They come down from the top of Mount Hermon, down into the valley of the plains, and then they begin their illegal activity. Jesus years later, is standing at the base of Mount Hermon. He is standing there with his disciples in Caesarea Philippi, and that's the location where the Greeks, by that time, had built mystical doorways into the base of that mountain, and actually in commemoration of the legends that dated back to the watchers descending on that mountain. And it's there where Jesus is standing with his disciples, and he says, the gates of hell will not prevail against my church.
In the 9th chapter of the book of Revelation, a star falls from heaven to the earth. He is given the key to the bottomless pit. When he opens the abyss, a great smoke arises, and all hell breaks loose.
And up out of this gateway of the earth come these terrible insectoids that begin tormenting unrighteous humanity, right? That's on the face of the earth. Many people, though, don't know that there's something very intriguing in that same chapter, chapter 9 of Revelation, ends by saying something extraordinary. It says that those people who are being tortured by these insectoids, these transgenic beings that come up out of the underworld, who have a king over them called Abaddon or Apollyon, it says, and yet they repented not of their sorceries. And the Greek word there, sorcery, is pharmakia. Now, what is pharmakia? In the biblical context, and the reason it was forbidden, pharmakia is the use of technology and sorcery for the express purpose of opening a doorway which God has closed in order to put ourselves in contact with what is behind it. It's the use of sorcery to open metaphysical doorways, gateways. So imagine this, that in Revelation 9, where the gates of the earth open and these terrible things come up and start torching humanity, it ends by saying, and yet they repented not of their pharmakia, of their effort to open doorways to the metaphysical world. So it's almost as if God is saying, you asked for it, you got it.
We are approaching another Tower of Babel moment on the earth. Another Nimrod is arising. The rebellion and sorcery of the Sumerians is reigniting in the hearts of men. Soon, forbidden gates will be opened, and the man of sin will appear. Even now, theological foundations are being laid in anticipation of the arrival of a superior alien race. The fishhead priests of Babylon are preparing to fulfill their occult destiny and welcome from heaven the return of the gods. Those who control the past determine the future. The reality of the pre-flood age has been concealed, covered over and covered up, so that the truth of prehistory will remain forgotten, and the world will be doomed to repeat it. God said that his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. The great deception of the future will take advantage of the ignorance of the past. Only the truth can prepare us for the lie that's coming.
For thousands of years, Luciferians have been envisioning the time in which we now live. The consummation of their ancient plan is finally drawing near. The lost knowledge of the Watchers has been recovered. Like Osiris, the Golden Age will be resurrected, and fallen angels will lead mankind in one last insurrection.
History is being repeated. The days of Noah are returning, and men's hearts will fail them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming upon the earth.
years after my deployments to Afghanistan, something very strange happened to me that is somewhat related to this. I was basically TDY to Kirtland Air Force Base, which is out in Albuquerque. I was out with my JAG at the time, and there was a Navajo Native American sitting basically in the restaurant that we're in. It was also a bar. It was actually Kelly's Brew Pub. And this Native American guy, out of nowhere, he was talking to us, very friendly guy. And out of nowhere, he asked me if I knew what a Native American sing was. And no, I didn't at the time. I do now because I looked it up. But he says, I have to sing for you. And he put his hand on me and started a Native American prayer, if you will. And I thought, wow, this is very strange. But it was cool as well. My JAG that I was with actually took out her Apple iPhone and started to film it, and he stopped and said, no, not on film. And she put it away, and he sang the prayer, and here's where it gets very strange. He started talking about, did I know that there were giants out in the Sandia Mountains? And he said, they're out there in the mountains still, and the earth had swallowed them up. And he goes, watch out. He says, someday they're going to come back. They're going to come back. I then took him aside and said, hey, as a matter of fact, I've seen these things. They're real. At least I think I've seen these things. And I basically conveyed to him the story. He just took it in stride and said, yes, they're real. They're absolutely real. And he said something like, if I remember correctly, like the earth had swallowed them up, but soon the earth will spit them back out. And soon, he said soon, they're coming back.